having sat here and listened to the last few hours worth of very, very different talks. So to give you a quick reminder, we started off with Minister Ghani giving the perspective from a UK government angle, saying, well, what's going on within governments at the moment to really try and drive that attention, but also, I guess, fairness and access to these minerals. So there's a huge amount of thought that's going on at government levels at the moment across the world. We then went across to Teresa and Roger, who gave us insight into where ESG is being truly incorporated into some of the more geological governance that get shared across the world. Then we went to Katie, who gave us the perspectives from tech, and a fantastically, I guess, open and humble, to use your own words there, talk to say, look, we recognize where we have problems. And so what do we then do to try and address those, and transparency really being key with regards to that. Then across to Eva, who gave us that fantastic rundown on what on earth is this thing called UNRMS. So I don't know who gave us the most acronyms this afternoon. I'm not sure who's winning that particular prize, but thank you, Eva, for saying, okay, this is actually what is going on with regards to that, I guess, regional insight when you're trying to say, well, how might those different resources be used across a particular region, or where are they and how do they interact with one another? Then across to Tim and Michael talking about beneficial ownership and the fact that actually some countries have really, got fantastic systems that we can tap into, whilst others might be a little bit more opaque in terms of what we can tap into there. And then across to Canada, to Paul and George, and really say, again, everything is a system, everything is a network, but then also what I really loved from there was, how do you take that data that might be collected by somebody totally different to you, but still be brave enough or courageous enough to say, well, no, I'm going to include this in the decision making. So how do I make use of that? And then finally, this fabulous story that you guys shared, Katie and Dara, from Burkina Faso with regards to, okay, well, let's put our finger on that problem and do something about it in a way that not only respects those people that live in that community, but allows everybody to interact with dignity as well. So I think that was absolutely fantastic. So with regards to that, what I'm going to do is invite all of you just to say, okay, did you have any aha moments, or what was your main takeaway from the last few hours? If anybody wants to go first, then wave at me. If not, I'm going to go to Katie first, because I know that Katie always has been sitting there thinking, I know how I want to comment on this. So Katie, perhaps if I can come to you first, and then I'm actually going to go to Paul. So Katie, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I actually wanted to share a question for my fellow panelists. I was struck by Paul and George, the cognitive map that you popped up. And one of you made a comment like, we made this map after the fact. Why didn't we make it before? And I should kind of draw upon that. I think so many of the examples we shared today are in hindsight of what we could have done differently. And my question to the panel is, how can we, as we look at greenfield operations, as we're entering into new jurisdictions, as we're doing things for the first time in certain circumstances, encourage our management teams, our peers, our colleagues to start with the cognitive map, to do it right from the first time? Maybe I'll pause there and get your thoughts.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Katie. I have a big answer there because we use them the whole time. So I'm biased with regards to that. But Paul, seeing as I was going to come to you anyway, do you want to either build on what Katie's just posed, or do you have any aha moments? And then we'll go to Eva.
Well, I think George wants to reply to that comment, but I just wanted to say that my aha moment really was just Eva's comment on embracing the complexity. I think that quite often we run away from it, but I think that if we can find ways to embrace that complexity and have those dialogues and give it a go, as it were, then I think it'll solve a lot of problems, because it works out in the dialogue itself. The process of sitting down and dialoguing is so important. So that really stuck out to me. George?
Fantastic.
Yes, just thank you for...
Go on, George.
Thank you for asking this question, because it's critical. These things should be done before the project, right? to do them before the project. It's not a major enterprise. It's simply improving consultations, filling gaps involving the community. We see, or I saw, in my, I don't know, 30 years at the University of Ottawa, I saw community of Akwesasne on St. Lawrence River, and this was discussed 50 times. Only if we knew that, only if we did this in the 50s, instead of 70s, 80s, and 90s, the 60% of the community has type 2 diabetes. If health prevention plans were introduced in the 50s and 60s, many of these people, and in indigenous communities and in non-indigenous communities, they would have better life. Only issue of policing in Akwesasne because of breakdown of traditional economy is in hundreds of millions of dollars. Some of it could have been prevented. So that's basically my comment. Things should be done before. This should be done before the project. Yes, agree.
There we go, Katie. Simple
Thanks for asking the question.
Yeah. Awesome. Ava, do you want to chip in on the discussion, and then we'll go to Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, Katie, I must say your talk mostly got me thinking about how do you do this really. And it was when you were saying that, but we've got principles, so we should just go ahead and start doing stuff around it. I think it is that we just kind of need to make a start on some of these things and not be afraid of tackling the big questions, even though we might not have all the data to back it up. Again, kind of with the theme of this, I really think it's that transparency and bringing everybody to the table to get all of the ideas, because if you don't have that range of perspectives, you might not identify all of the problems quick enough. So by talking to as many people and getting that range of perspectives, you might actually find the answers faster. So yeah, I think that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Eva. Michael, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Dara.
Yeah, thank you. So I think quite a few things impressed me this afternoon, but one of the ones is, again, going back to Katie's presentation, and she talks about the kind of bravery of the company making the kind of leap in terms of transparency around occupational disease and deaths from occupational disease. Thinking about this is often what's needed is, and again, from the very beginning of a project, the bravery of companies in particular to be transparent and to act in a transparent way from the start. And as well, and that's not just meaning about kind of identifying who's really owning the companies you're doing business with, but Tim and I also do a lot of work on contract transparency and being brave to kind of go into contract negotiations on the understanding that it will all be made public in due course, and that really changes the psychology of the negotiating process, and hopefully end up with a more equitable and balanced contract at the end of it. So that's my thoughts.
So do you think, Michael, with that, just before we go across to Dara, do you think there's a courage to be vulnerable or potentially vulnerable that's here?
I think there's a courage. I'm not sure about vulnerable, but there's a courage to, I think it was Kate herself who mentioned she's like me, a language graduate rather than a science graduate, about storytelling and being able to have the bravery to tell your own story, and also the bravery to be challenged, and not necessarily use the word vulnerable. Yes, to be open. I suppose there is a vulnerability about it. Yes, because if you put information out there, people will try and throw stones at it and challenge you and say whether it's the terms of a contract or whether it's your numbers on health and safety or whether it's your contributions to the community or whatever it happens to be.
Great, thank you for that, Michael. Fantastic. Dara, how about yourself? Any aha moments you want to share with us that you've heard this afternoon? And then we'll go to Katie.
Thanks once more, because this is a big opportunity for us to make the voice heard about the challenges which are faced by the artisanal scale miners. So once more, we congratulate those running the program. One main point is how relevant it is to work on the financial inclusion to solve all the responsible sourcing challenges. Unless we find a definitive or a very sustainable solution to this challenge, all our efforts will be facing the financial challenge. So it's very important we can really work on it. And I quite agree with the point about George and what George and Paul said about involving the communities. There is no other option. Like what we did now, we had a factor of success because all the process involved the communities. Our main target in this project is making the, how should I say, for women empowerment. But based on the community agreements, we adapted it. We were able to solve their own needs. So involving the communities is the key element to getting those results.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Dara. Fantastic. And Katie, how about your final words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think one of the things that strikes me is that in some ways the mining sector and the development sector is kind of similar in a way, in the terms of, you know, we arrive, you know, into these communities where we're working, and we have a lot of, you know, preconceived notions or assumptions or ways of thinking that are our own, you know, sort of bias in terms of where we come from. And so I think that, you know, really understanding and trying to gain the perspective of those within the communities is absolutely paramount, because they're not going to see things the way that we see them. And even if, you know, we are transparent about why we're there or what we're doing or that sort of thing, it's not always interpreted that way because they don't see things the same way. And I think, you know, I think about the examples of sort of the tax payments that were mentioned in the chat, and a former hat, I used to be the interim director of Publish What UK Canada, so I worked a lot in the extractive sector transparency space. And I mean, to be honest, it's also an assumption that communities even know their own taxation frameworks in the country, right? And so there's just a lot, I think, of emphasis that really needs to be made on having that deep understanding and having that communicated and validated by the community themselves, I think is just absolutely crucial.
I totally agree, Katie. Absolutely. And I was going to attempt to read out like 3 words to summarize this afternoon, but that's not possible given the number of words that I have written down on my piece of paper. But suffice to say, we have hit 6 o'clock UK time here, which signals the end of our first session for this year's Responsible Raw Material Conference.